On a balmy evening in September 2013, I observed the radiant full moon while driving along a quiet road enveloped in dense fog that had settled over the town. Having just completed a lengthy shift at the medical center, I anticipated a tranquil night ahead. However, destiny had alternate intentions for me. Navigating a bend in the road, I noticed two vehicles parked on the side, bathed in the glow of a streetlight. As I approached, it became evident that a man was being confronted at gunpoint by another individual. The victim trembled and pleaded with the armed man, who, relentless in his pursuit of money and valuables, remained unfazed by the pleas. Initially unnoticed, perhaps due to the commotion, I felt my hands quiver on the steering wheel, realizing I was an inadvertent witness to a crime in progress. Determined to act swiftly, I maneuvered my car to a shadowy section of the road, fumbling for my phone in my pocket. My heart raced as I dialed 911, keeping my gaze fixed on the unfolding robbery. The tension heightened when the gunman unexpectedly turned in my direction, dispelling my illusion of remaining concealed in the darkness. Hastily accelerating away, I prayed he wouldn't pursue. Driving for several nerve-wracking minutes, I recounted the harrowing scene. When I finally pulled over, my phone rang, the police on the line. Uncertain of how long they had been listening to my heavy breathing and mild swearing, I felt a sense of relief upon hearing that help was on the way. As I sat in my car, waiting for the police to arrive, a vehicle pulled up behind me. Initially fearing it was the gunman, my apprehension eased when I realized it was another driver, likely curious about the situation. However, my unease returned as the driver paced behind his vehicle, creating an unsettling atmosphere. Locked doors and vigilant observation ensued, with thoughts of calling the police once again. Just as my suspicions heightened, flashing lights in the distance signaled the arrival of the cavalry. Two squad cars pulled up, providing a sense of relief, although the other driver remained. Unsure of his intentions, I held my guard until the authorities took control of the situation. If it had not been the gunman, he likely would have left by now, so I began to feel a bit more at ease. However, uncertainty lingered. If not the gunman, then who was this individual? One of the law enforcement officers approached my car, and we discussed the unfolding events briefly. Advising me to remain in my car, the officer walked away, while both of them approached the other driver. Ceasing his pacing, the driver stood silently by his car. Observing through my rearview mirror, I witnessed both officers approaching him. Suddenly, the driver sprinted into the woods, vanishing into the darkness. Despite the police officers giving chase, he proved too swift and elusive. For hours, law enforcement scoured the area, combing through the woods and inspecting nearby residences, yet the driver had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a multitude of unanswered questions. The following day, the police contacted me, revealing that they had identified the driver, who had a lengthy criminal history. They expressed gratitude for my prompt reporting of the crime and my keen observation, which aided them in apprehending a dangerous criminal. The driver's behavior remained perplexing. Why did he follow me to that location, and why did he not flee as soon as the police arrived? Perhaps he was under the influence of something, or maybe he lacked sharp judgment. In the subsequent weeks, thoughts of that night consumed me. While I acknowledged the inherent dangers of getting involved, I couldn't shake the conviction that calling the police was the right thing to do. Despite the risks, I would make the same choice again. It was a clear-cut decision. What would anyone do when witnessing a robbery in plain sight? Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell to receive all new updates. I've been a cab driver for more than a decade, and this incident occurred nearly 4 years ago. I've encountered all sorts of passengers, from rowdy drunks to quiet individuals, but nothing could have prepared me for the night that altered my life. It was a chilly evening, the type that makes you crave the warmth of your home and blankets. Despite the urge to stay in, duty beckoned, and I had to fulfill my responsibilities. I was cruising through the city, searching for my next fare, when I spotted him standing on a corner. He was a tall man dressed in a dark suit, hands in his pockets. He signaled for a ride, and as he entered the back seat, I could sense his nervousness. He scanned the interior as if searching for something. I greeted him, and he responded with a nod. "Where to?" I asked, and he provided an address on the opposite side of town. As we drove, I attempted small talk to break the ice. He was polite but reserved, responding with only a few words. Suddenly, he changed his destination, guiding me through a dim, desolate street. He asked me to stop in front of an old, seemingly abandoned building. Unsure of his intentions, I hesitated, but he assured me it was safe. Upon parking, he exited and instructed me to wait. Observing him approaching a menacing-looking man on the street, they exchanged words. The other man, with a shaved head and numerous tattoos, presented a stark contrast to my passenger's polished appearance. Though tempted to drive away, I waited just in time for both to return to the car. My passenger told me to drive, and I complied. Unease settled in as they conversed in hushed tones, with only a few words discernible. A suspicion crept in that I might be unwittingly involved in a crime. My heart raced, and I realized I needed to protect myself. While the logical choice would be to follow through and contact the police afterward, there was a police station only a few blocks away. Making a quick decision, I took a turn, accelerating towards the station. However, as we approached, the passenger abruptly pulled out a gun, pointing it at me. "Don't even think about it," he warned. I continued driving, but before I could react, we found ourselves right in front of the law enforcement office. I brought the car to a halt, and the two individuals hastily exited, fleeing the scene. I was in a state of shock, my heart pounding audibly. After regaining my composure, I entered the station and recounted the incident to the police. While uncertain of the motives behind the incident, I emphasized that one of the men had brandished a firearm. I provided a description to the best of my ability. Later, I discovered that the security cameras at the police station had captured the two individuals. The proximity was so close that it sent shivers down my spine. The following day, the police contacted me, requesting my presence at the station for an interview. They had apprehended the two culprits and sought my identification. During a lineup of suspects, I promptly recognized the passenger, pointing him out to the authorities. He was arrested and charged with attempted robbery and assault. The intimidating companion was also taken into custody, and a weapon linking him to additional crimes was found. I felt a sense of relief knowing they were no longer a threat on the streets. With time, the memory of that harrowing night began to fade, and I resumed my routine. While I've encountered other unsettling experiences throughout my years as a driver, perhaps I'll share those stories another day. Nonetheless, this remains the most frightening incident. After completing my second year of university, I finally purchased my first car. Back in high school, owning a car was a distant dream, but thanks to student loans, I managed to acquire a pre-owned Honda Civic. I was driving it back to my hometown for the summer, a significant upgrade from the routine bus rides I was accustomed to. With an approximately 8-hour journey ahead, I set out early in the morning. Several hours into the drive, boredom began to set in. I had noticed a few hitchhikers along the route but decided against picking anyone up, uncertain about the legality in my area. However, after another monotonous half-hour, I spotted a hitchhiker by the roadside. Slowing down, I assessed him before making a decision. He appeared to be a guy around my age, sporting a scruffy beard, a bandana, a jean jacket, brown pants, and running shoes, just an ordinary-looking person. I pulled over, and he jogged over. "Hey, how's it going?" I greeted. "Great, thanks, man." "I'm Alex," he replied graciously. I unlocked the door, and he hopped into the front seat as we started chatting. We hit it off quite well, he was humorous, and we discovered numerous common interests. Time flew by, and after over an hour, I realized Alex hadn't mentioned his destination. Curious, I asked, and he explained he was visiting a friend's small hobby farm nearby. He assured me he could walk the rest of the way from the highway exit if needed. Feeling a newfound friendship, I had no qualms deviating from my route to save him from a lengthy walk. I committed to taking him all the way to the farm, he just needed to guide me once we hit the highway exit. As we continued driving, Alex directed me to the next exit, leading us onto a remote dirt road in the countryside. Surrounded by expansive cornfields, it didn't match the image of a small hobby farm I had in mind. "Are we in the right place?" I asked. "Yeah, this is it," he replied casually. Perplexed, I inquired about the location. "We're here, just let me out," he insisted. I brought the car to a stop, and without a word of gratitude, Alex swiftly exited and started walking down the road away from my car. I was left baffled, stranded in the middle of nowhere, questioning the situation. Reached my destination, even though it wasn't where he claimed he wanted to go, my skepticism grew. Despite being slightly put off by his rudeness, I turned my car around and retraced my route. The country road, previously deserted, suddenly saw the appearance of a black pickup truck, blocking my path. Unsure of the make or model, I was perplexed until I noticed another truck approaching from behind. It dawned on me that I had fallen into a trap, and Pete must have been in on it. With seconds to spare, I needed to make a decision as the space around me rapidly closed in. Glancing left, I saw endless cornfields. Looking right, I saw more of the same, but in the distance, the highway was faintly visible. Opting to navigate through the fields, I veered right, plowing through the corn with my vision obstructed. After a few tense minutes, I reached the highway, turning onto it, garnering curious stares from fellow drivers. It was a close call, and although it could have ended worse, what stuck with me was how easily Pete gained my trust. Normally, I wouldn't follow a stranger into the middle of nowhere, but an hour of conversation was all it took to lower my defenses. Lesson learned: stay safe out there, everyone. A few years ago, I embarked on a cross-country road trip, fulfilling a long-standing desire. Accepting a job on the West Coast provided the perfect excuse to tick off an item from my bucket list. While flying would have been faster and cheaper, I was eager to explore the often overlooked parts of America. However, an incident during the trip made me regret my decision. Planning for the journey to last just over a week, I aimed to have ample time to see sights and avoid driving after dark, a prospect that always frightened me. On the fifth day, ahead of schedule and nearing Utah's border with the Rocky Mountains in my rearview mirror, I decided it was time to stop for the night as the sun set. Luck had been on my side, with motels found almost every evening, except for one night when I had to sleep in my car, a less than pleasant experience. As I reached my destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that the trip could have taken a much darker turn. Spotted a sign for a motel on the highway, and a sense of relief washed over me. I took the next exit, following the signs until I reached the motel. A vibrant neon sign towered over the parking lot, the sun nearly setting behind it. The motel, a single-level structure shaped like an L around the parking area, had 3 or 4 other cars among the 10 or 15 available spaces. I parked my car and walked to the office, renting a room for the night. Making my way to the other side of the building where my room was located, everything seemed ordinary upon entering. It was a reasonably clean place with a bed and TV, all I needed. One peculiar aspect was the thin walls. As soon as I stepped into my room, I could hear my neighbor talking. It seemed like he was on the phone, with just one voice audible, muffled enough to make out only every 5 or 6 words. It was a mild inconvenience as I prepared for bed after a shower and teeth brushing, aiming to resume my journey early the next morning. As I lay in bed, my head against the wall where my neighbor's voice emanated, I noticed the conversation shift. It now sounded like 2 men arguing, and amidst their muffled words, I thought I caught some slang for drugs. The argument escalated into a full-on shouting match, with swearing that almost led me to call the police. However, I hesitated, deeming it not my business. Suddenly, a chilling moment unfolded, the loud, thunderous sound of a gunshot, followed by silence. I jumped out of bed, hitting the floor, concerned that if the walls allowed conversation through, they wouldn't stop a bullet. After a few tense minutes of silence, I dialed 911. Sirens approached before I even disclosed my location, and upon police arrival, I shared what I overheard. Thankfully, the bullet had only pierced the ceiling, causing no harm. It seemed like a warning shot, and the 2 individuals had likely fled. The incident kept me awake for the rest of the night, and I resumed driving as soon as the sun came up, reaching my new home without further incident. Though it could have been worse, the memory occasionally creeps into my thoughts. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, my family decided to take a vacation to Southern California to visit my grandparents. They resided in a quaint town right along the Pacific Ocean, where the climate was pleasant and the beaches were stunning. Anticipating these trips was always exciting for me since I hailed from the northern part of the country, where the weather was far from ideal throughout the year. Our usual time for these trips was in March, coinciding with a week off from school for my brother and me. We would embark on our journey early in the morning, well before sunrise. My dad usually took the wheel, but my mom would occasionally take over to give him some rest. The road trip was quite lengthy, typically done in one continuous stretch with occasional breaks to stretch our legs and grab a quick meal. One of our pit stops was at a fast food restaurant, such as Burger King, where we expected a swift and convenient meal. During one of these stops, as we were standing in line, a man began shouting at my dad, accusing him of cutting in line. Despite my dad's attempts to explain, the man refused to listen, and my mom tried to defuse the situation without success. I vividly recall feeling frightened and wanting to hide, but my dad remained composed, choosing not to engage with the man's hostility. After finishing our meal, we resumed our journey, only to realize that the man from the fast food stop was tailing us. Ignoring him for a while, hoping he would change direction, proved futile. Observing him from the rear window intensified my fear. Concerned, my mom asked my dad what we should do. He advised her to ignore him, confident that the man would lose interest eventually. Suddenly, our car was forcefully struck from behind, causing it to swerve. My brother started crying, and it became evident that we needed to involve the police. My mom dialed 911, maintaining a calm tone for my brother's and my sake. In just a few minutes, we heard sirens, and a police car approached from behind. We pulled over, and the other car continued driving while the police pursued it. Another police car arrived behind us, and an officer approached, informing us that the man had been arrested. It turned out he was intoxicated and already on probation for past violent incidents. After assessing the damage to our car, my dad decided to proceed with the trip. Although there was a significant dent in the bumper from the collision, the police assured us it was safe. The remainder of our vacation was filled with joy and laughter as we basked in the California sunshine and spent quality time with our grandparents. We explored the local beaches, savored delicious seafood, and wandered around the charming town where my grandparents lived. On our journey back home, I reflected on our fortunate escape from the dangerous situation. Accidents are commonplace on the highways, and we could have been forced off the road by that individual. Thankfully, that didn't happen. I've been operating trucks since my early 20s, and now at 35, during this particular incident, I was transporting waste across the border between Alberta, Canada, and the United States. Admittedly, it's not my ideal job, but I earn over $90,000 annually, and considering I never completed high school, it's not entirely unfavorable. Typically, I'd commence my day at 6 a.m., and once I adjusted to the early mornings, the hours didn't bother me much. The roads were consistently serene in the first couple of hours, offering a peaceful solitude. Conversely, the roads could be perilous, especially during busy times. On this occasion, I found myself on an unfamiliar route. A segment of my usual path was closed for construction, forcing me to take an alternate route. The road I navigated wasn't a highway, it was a single lane each way, bordered by forests on both sides. It was just past 6 o'clock in the morning, the early days of April in northern Wisconsin, and the morning chill lingered, likely around freezing. My hands trembled on the wheel as the truck hadn't completely warmed up. I leaned over to adjust the heat, realizing the empty cup holder in the center console. A cup of coffee would have been perfect at that moment. Upon returning my gaze to the road, I observed movement in the woods to the right. I swiftly turned my head, attempting to catch another glimpse, but whatever it was had vanished. It seemed human, but the quick glance left me uncertain. Though deer were common in the area, sightings were scarce that year. I decided to pull over to check if someone needed assistance. The location was secluded, far from any signs of human activity. After stopping the truck, I opened the driver's side door and stepped out. Entering the woods, I scanned the surroundings, finding nothing. I walked for a minute or two, calling out a hesitant hello, but received no response. A disconcerting atmosphere enveloped the air, and though fear and curiosity started to surface, there was no apparent reason. I continued my exploration, nearing the spot where I'd seen the figure, and that's when I noticed something on the forest floor. Approaching cautiously, I discovered a pile of bloodied clothes, with a piece of duct tape attached to one of them. A quick scan of the area revealed no one in sight. Feeling a mixture of fear and curiosity, I walked back to my truck hastily, locked the door, and dialed 911. Despite the distance from the nearest town, the police arrived in less than 10 minutes. Returning to the spot with them, we found nothing. Concerned that the officer might doubt my account, he took the situation seriously, calling for backup. Despite a thorough search of the forest based on my report, nothing was ever uncovered. Nearly 2 years later, I've diligently followed the news, but there have been no reports of missing individuals or bodies discovered related to that incident. To this day, the mystery remains unsolved, leaving me clueless about the events that transpired, yet convinced that something unusual occurred that day. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell to receive all new updates. A few years ago, I used to work as a part-time driver for a rideshare service, not Uber. Despite having a good full-time job that allowed me to work from home, I realized I had minimal real-life interactions with others. Wanting a change of scenery occasionally, I decided to hit the road for a few hours each week. However, after a particular incident, I quit and never looked back. Around 8 p.m., my usual time to start driving, things were slow. In the first hour, I only had 2 passengers. One was a group of college-aged girls heading to some party on a Tuesday night, and the other was a single woman, possibly a waitress, going home from work. Following a 10 or 20-minute idle period, I received a ride request from a user with no rating, not a significant concern, as everyone starts somewhere. Although it was uncommon, I accepted and drove to the pickup location, which was about a 10-minute drive and conveniently close to my apartment. In fact, I passed my building on the way. Upon reaching the spot, I pulled over, but there was no one in sight. I messaged my passenger, Telly, according to the app, and received a reply after a few seconds, poorly written but indicating he would be there shortly. Despite my usual policy of waiting only 10 minutes, I decided to be patient. 7.5 minutes later, a man approached my car and identified himself as Telly. He appeared to be in his early 20s, with a lengthy beard, wild bushy hair, and thin-framed glasses. Slightly overweight, he got in without much conversation. Trying to engage in a friendly manner, I asked, "How's your night going?" Tilly responded with a brief "fine," his tone making it clear he wasn't interested in talking. Respecting his preference, I refrained from further conversation and focused on driving while Tilly remained engrossed in his phone. For the most part, he seemed fine, but every now and then, he would glance out the window in a troubling manner, appearing worried about something. Another observation was his nervous demeanor, shaking, sweating, and, I suspected, possibly having cried recently. It could have been stress, but his overall demeanor was making me increasingly uneasy. I found myself periodically checking him through the rearview mirror, growing concerned that he might be under the influence of drugs. During one glance, I noticed his hands tightly gripping his phone, and upon closer inspection, I saw bloodstains and clear cuts on his knuckles, along with a bloodstain on his shirt. Feeling thoroughly creeped out, I anxiously awaited our approaching destination, hoping he would soon be gone. When we finally reached the destination, which turned out to be a McDonald's, Tilly got out and muttered a quick thanks before disappearing. After that unsettling encounter, I called it a night, driving home and going to bed. The following day, as I worked at my desk, a loud knock at my door startled me. Peering through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers. My heart sank, and my mind raced as I cautiously opened the door. They informed me they were searching for a suspect wanted for mugging and brutally beating an elderly man. When they showed me a picture, I immediately recognized Telly. I cooperated fully, providing the police with my Uber account records and dash cam footage. Telly was apprehended that day, but I never discovered the subsequent developments. Despite attempting to find news articles about the incident, there were none. This incident prompted me to stop driving shortly thereafter. The risks for drivers are too great, and it's simply not worth it to me anymore. I work as a Lyft driver, and over the past 4 years, I've encountered some unusual situations. This particular incident stands out as the most frightening night of my life, and it happened just last month. I was on the late-night shift in a city with a population of just under 1 million, not exactly a bustling metropolis, but large enough to always have something going on. It's easy to escape the commotion and venture into the countryside or forest with just a short drive. One Saturday night, or rather Sunday morning around midnight, I picked up a passenger. He seemed a bit younger than me. I'm 28, and I'd guess he was around 25. Standing at 5 feet 8 inches, clean-shaven with a buzzed head, he had big bug-like eyes. As he entered my car, he barely acknowledged me. I didn't mind the lack of conversation, as I'm not one to talk all the time. His destination was in an area I wasn't familiar with, located outside the city in a rural part. It would take approximately 30 minutes to get there. During the drive, I observed him in the rearview mirror. He had hardly spoken, absorbed in his phone with a troubling expression on his face, resembling anger, like a manager displeased with employees. While accustomed to various passengers, especially late at night, this guy wasn't intoxicated. I could sense that. You develop a knack for these things in my line of work. Navigating onto a country road, the smooth pavement gave way to rough gravel, immediately noticeable. With no street lights, the full moon illuminated the path ahead. Glancing at the map on my phone, I realized his final destination wasn't far, but the surroundings were desolate, a cornfield on the right and a forest on the left. "Hey, buddy, are you sure this is right?" I asked. "We're almost there," he replied, offering the first full sentence of our interaction. After a few minutes, I spotted a distant light. Unsure at first, it became apparent it was a truck as I approached. There was a man in the front seat. I could barely make out his figure as I pulled up in front of the truck. My passenger quickly exited, closing the door behind him, and hopped into the waiting truck. I turned my car around and started heading back, puzzled by the odd situation. It struck me as strange that someone would request an Uber to a truck in the middle of nowhere. Why wouldn't his friend just pick him up? Despite my confusion, I didn't dwell on it at the time. About half a mile from where I dropped him off, my car suddenly lost control. It felt like all 4 tires had burst simultaneously, and I swerved left and right, struggling to stay on the road. Eventually, I came to a stop. Taking a moment to compose myself in the driver's seat, I got out to inspect the damage. To my surprise, all 4 tires were flat, far too coincidental to be natural. Something was amiss. Without thinking, I darted into the woods beside the road, hiding behind a tree and waiting. After a minute or two, I spotted a pair of bright headlights approaching my car. It was the same truck from earlier, now with 3 men inside. One was my passenger, another was the person I had seen earlier, and there was a third man. They parked in front of my car, and it dawned on me that I had left my phone inside. Suppressing a curse, I realized I had likely fallen into a trap. Perhaps the third guy had deployed a spike strip or something after I passed by. The 3 men got out of the truck and approached my car, questioning the whereabouts of someone. Panicking, I hid my head behind the tree, fearing for my life. They continued talking, rummaging through my car, and I regretted not having my phone with me. After a few more minutes, the truck drove away, and I was relieved. I cautiously ventured out and got a clear look at the truck. All 3 men were still there. This was my chance. I started walking through the woods, knowing it would be at least an hour-long trek to reach the main road. I couldn't risk taking the road and getting caught. Eventually, I made it to the road and flagged down a passing car. The driver helped me call 911, and the police met us at the side of the road. I recounted the incident, and we went to a rest stop to discuss it further. When the officer returned from checking the scene, he told me there was nothing there. Initially thinking he went to the wrong place, he showed me pictures of skid marks from my burst tires. It was the right spot. Those individuals had stolen my car, and although their motive remained unknown, I was grateful to have survived. While my tormentors remained at large, I held on to hope. A few years ago, I had a frightening encounter with a stranger, and that's the story I want to share. I reside in a different town than my family, and I used to make an 8-hour drive to visit them at least once or twice a year. I typically completed the journey in a single day, starting in the morning or early afternoon. It happened in late October when I was well over halfway there, and the sun was setting, casting an orange glow on the landscape as I drove along a quiet road. I noticed a transport truck pulled over to the side with its hazard lights flashing. Initially unsure if anyone was inside, I pulled over, thinking that perhaps someone needed help. Stepping out of my car, I walked toward the truck, finding it empty. However, I noticed a wooded area next to the truck. Calling out a hello, I received no response. As I turned to walk back to my car, a noise behind me caught my attention. Turning around, I saw a man standing there, holding a gun and pointing it directly at me. He was a big man, probably around 5 feet 10 inches, with a muscular build. The man didn't say anything but kept his gun trained on me. Fearfully, I slowly backed away with my hands raised. I was too scared to speak, and my thoughts were a jumble. I continued backing away until I reached my car, keeping my eyes on the man the whole time. Carefully opening my car door, I got in, locked all the doors, and started the engine. I watched the man lower his gun as I drove away. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw him standing by his truck, watching me. I sped towards my family's town, my heart racing as I tried to process the terrifying ordeal. As I replayed the scene in my mind, the gravity of the situation sank in. The man could have easily shot me or taken my car, but he didn't. Perhaps he was as scared as I was. I speculated that he might have thought I was attempting to rob him, the only explanation I could fathom. Later, I wondered if the truck driver had something to hide. Perhaps there was something in his truck or in the woods that he didn't want anyone to discover. These thoughts emerged long after the incident, and I remained uncertain of the truth. Upon reaching my family's town, I felt relieved. I recounted the incident to them, and they were shocked and concerned. We spent the rest of the evening talking and catching up. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. This occurred last autumn, around mid-September. I work as a truck driver, often undertaking multi-day overnight trips. On a particular evening, it was getting late, and exhaustion was setting in. Recognizing the need to stop for the night, I pulled into a rest area off the highway. It was a small rest stop, accommodating only 3 or 4 trucks. Another truck was already parked, and there were around 4 or 5 cars in the lot. The rest area featured a compact restroom with a basic shower and an adjacent restaurant. After parking, I headed to the restroom for a quick shower and then had dinner at the restaurant. Following that, I retired to the back of my cab for some rest. Suddenly, I was jolted awake by the realization that I urgently needed to relieve myself. Not literally stating it, but the call of nature was undeniable. Glancing at my watch, I discovered it was 3 a.m. Despite my reluctance to get up, I had no choice. I crawled out of my truck and made my way to the restroom. While washing my hands, I heard approaching footsteps, which struck me as odd since I hadn't noticed anyone else when I initially got up. Exiting the restroom and heading back to my truck, I encountered a man standing in front of it. He stood about 6 feet tall, with dark hair, wearing a dirty, oversized hoodie and baggy jeans. A nearby light cast a large shadow over most of his body. Attempting to pass by him, he blocked my way, sporting a menacing look in his eyes. Before I could utter a word, he brandished a knife, demanding my wallet. Fear gripped me, but I remained composed. Slowly, I retrieved my wallet and handed it over. After rifling through it, he complained about the meager $30 and searched my pockets, finding my cell phone. Fortunately, I had left my keys in the truck. Though not the best habit, it proved beneficial in this situation. The man inspected my phone for a moment, ordering me to unlock it. Hesitating, as it was my only lifeline, I agreed, then took a step back and sprinted towards my truck. I could hear him chasing, but I managed to outpace him. Jumping into the cab, I locked all the doors. He stood outside, still holding the knife, banging on the window and shouting obscenities. I called the police from my phone, providing them with the rest stop's location. Looking out the window, the man had vanished. Uncertain how he had arrived at the rest stop and puzzled by the absence of movement among the trucks and cars since his disappearance, I awaited the police. In what felt like an eternity but was only a few minutes, the police arrived. They instructed me to stay in my truck while they searched the area. After about half an hour, they apprehended the man. His hiding spot and intended destination remained mysteries. I also couldn't fathom how he had reached the rest stop initially. Most perplexing was the question, what was he doing on the highway at 3 a.m. with no vehicle? It was an unusual scenario. Sleep eluded me for the remainder of the night, and by the time the police proceedings concluded, it was already 4 a.m. Attempting to relax in my truck for an hour, I resumed my journey when the sun rose. I never learned the outcome of the man's situation, as I was far from home and couldn't be bothered to follow up. Please do not forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell to receive all new updates.